Welcome to Life Stories, where we share real, raw, and inspiring journeys of resilience, love, and self-discovery. Today, we bring you the story of Kimberly, a woman who faced unimaginable challenges growing up but found the strength to build a life for herself and her child. From the pain of abandonment to unexpected support, Kimberly's journey teaches us about the power of perseverance and the importance of finding strength within ourselves. Join us as we explore her story and the lessons she's learned along the way. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. I was born into a life that should have been filled with love, warmth, and the promise of a bright future. Instead, the reality of my life started with a tragic twist. My mother passed away the moment I entered this world, a consequence of complications during childbirth. I never had the chance to know her. All I had left of her was the echo of the love my father once spoke of her and the quiet, lingering sense of loss that lived within me. My father, a man of strength and resilience, was left to raise me alone. The first few years of my life were filled with his care and the stories of my mother he would tell me. But soon, after my grandmother passed away, I was all my father had left. He became my world, my protector, my provider, and the one person who could make everything feel right. Yet, there was a part of me that always yearned for something more. The absence of a mother left an emptiness I could never fill, no matter how much love my father gave. It was when I was about 8 years old that everything started to change. My father brought Tasha into our lives, a woman he seemed to love deeply. She was kind at first, treating me as though I were her own daughter. Tasha had dreamed of having a child, and now she finally had a family, and I was a part of it. We walked together, went on shopping trips, and shared moments that felt like they could last forever. But all that was about to shift when Tasha gave birth to my little sister, Iris. I remember the moment my father held Iris for the first time. His eyes gleamed in a way I had never seen before. It was as if he had forgotten I existed. There she was, his perfect little girl, and I was nothing but a shadow in the background. Tasha, too, became completely absorbed in her new role as a mother. Every waking moment was spent tending to Iris, and every smile, every word of affection was directed at her. I was relegated to the role of the responsible older sibling, the one who took care of Iris, the one who made sure the house was in order, the one who was never quite enough. Over the years, this pattern deepened. My father's gaze rarely fell upon me. My stepmother's care was no longer warm but sharp, filled with orders and reproaches. I wasn't good enough for them, no matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I did for my siblings. It was always Iris and Tom, the little brother who came along 2 years after Iris, who were the favorites. My father and Tasha adored them both in a way that felt alien to me. I wasn't just a second-class citizen in my own home, I was invisible. The years rolled on, and I grew accustomed to the background. I did my best to keep up with my studies, but it wasn't easy. I had become so used to taking care of everything else that I barely had time for myself. My schoolwork, once something I excelled in, became a struggle. The pressure of being the responsible one, the one who never asked for help, wore me down. My grades slipped, and I felt like I was drowning in a world that didn't see me. But I wasn't going to let this be my life forever. I knew that my escape, my way out, was through education. I wasn't going to be stuck in this house, lost in the background forever. By the time I reached high school, I had made a decision. I was going to college. I didn't have the luxury of time or the luxury of help, but I would make it work. I stayed late at the library, poring over textbooks, catching up on everything I had missed while caring for the family. I studied hard, and slowly, my grades improved. I was determined to make something of myself, to break free from the life I had known. But even then, when I finally achieved something worth celebrating, improving my grades and proving to myself that I could do it, no one noticed. No one cared. Iris performed on stage for the first time, and Tom learned to ride a bike, and all eyes were on them. My achievements were nothing in comparison. And so, I began to turn inward, burying my hopes, my dreams, my desires in the quiet spaces of my heart, far away from the family that never saw me. It was clear to me now, I had no place here. I wasn't the daughter, the sister, or even the friend. I was a shadow, a part of the background of a life I wasn't meant to be a part of. The decision to leave became inevitable. I had to leave, to build a life where I was seen, where my worth was recognized, even if only by myself. When I graduated high school, I packed up my things and left. There was no grand farewell. My father and Tasha were busy with their lives. It was the right time. I knew that. I had saved up money from my part-time jobs. And I was ready to move on. I had nothing left for them. And they had nothing left for me. I left the house with nothing more than a small backpack, a diploma, and a hope that one day, I would find a place where I belonged. Leaving my childhood home was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time, I was truly on my own, free to shape my life according to my own desires. But as freeing as that thought was, it didn't come without its challenges. I quickly learned that independence was not something to be taken lightly. The freedom I sought was overshadowed by the reality of responsibility, and I found myself struggling more than I had anticipated. I managed to rent a small room in a shared apartment, one that was far from ideal but offered me the independence I so desperately craved. My neighbors were a mix of people, none of whom I had much in common with. A single mother with 2 rowdy children lived next door, and on the other side was an elderly couple who loved to argue. The apartment was old, with chipped paint and creaky floors. It wasn't the fresh start I had imagined, but it was mine. At first, the loneliness was overwhelming. I had no family to turn to, no familiar faces to rely on. The cold walls of my tiny room seemed to echo my isolation. The days were long, and the nights even longer. But something deep inside me pushed me to keep going. I was determined to make it, to prove to myself that I could build a life for me, free from the constraints of my past. I found a job at a local diner, working long shifts as a waitress. It wasn't the teaching job I had dreamed of, but it was a start. The work was grueling. My feet ached after hours of standing, and the shifts were long and exhausting. But at least I had a paycheck. That was something. I spent my days serving meals, cleaning tables, and chatting with customers, trying to forget the constant anxiety that gnawed at me. Every penny I earned went toward rent and food. There was never enough left for anything else. It was during one of these long shifts that I met Jake. I was wiping down the counters after closing when he walked in, his presence immediately catching my attention. He was tall, handsome, with chestnut hair that slightly waved and eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischief. He was with a group of friends. But when he saw me, he approached with a smile that immediately set me at ease. I was tired, my feet throbbing from hours of standing. But when he offered to help, I couldn't refuse. Jake wasn't just handsome, he was kind. He worked with me to clean the diner, moving quickly and efficiently, as though it was second nature to him. We spoke as we worked, and I felt a connection with him that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was strange how someone could walk into your life and make everything seem a little bit brighter. Even for just a moment, I felt a sense of relief, something I hadn't realized I had been craving. As we finished cleaning, Jake offered to take me for a walk. I was hesitant at first, too tired to even think about doing anything but collapsing into bed. But something about him made me want to say yes. We wandered the city streets, talking and laughing, getting to know each other in the way that only strangers who become friends can. I was surprised at how much we had in common, our struggles, our dreams, and the way we both longed for something more than the life we had at the moment. Jake told me about his work as an economist and how, like me, he had big dreams but was stuck in a job that didn't pay well. He spoke of his mother, a woman who still treated him like a child, despite his attempts to show he was capable of taking care of himself. I found myself empathizing with him, understanding more than he probably realized. I, too, had felt the burden of being overlooked and underestimated. Over the next few weeks, Jake came to the diner every evening after work, helping me clean up and prepare for the next day. It became our routine, and with each passing day, I felt more and more drawn to him. He was kind, caring, and seemed genuinely interested in me. For the first time in a long while, I felt valued. Jake's presence in my life was a welcome distraction from the harsh reality I had been living. But even as I grew closer to him, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was somehow still on my own. I wasn't sure if he was truly invested in me or if I was just another passing fancy. Still, I allowed myself to dream. To imagine a life where I was loved and cared for. Where I didn't have to fight so hard to feel seen. It wasn't long before Jake asked me to move in with him. I was hesitant at first. I had just started to build a life for myself. And the idea of depending on someone else, of letting myself be vulnerable, was terrifying. But Jake promised me that he would support me. That together we could build a future. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was the start of something real. I moved in with Jake, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything was falling into place. But even in those moments of happiness, the shadow of my past remained. I still felt like I had something to prove, to myself, to my family, and to the world. At first, living with Jake felt like a dream, a safe haven from the loneliness that had once consumed me. But as time passed, I began to notice small changes in him that I hadn't seen before. The man who had once been so caring and attentive started to pull away. He no longer helped me with the diner or spent as much time with me. His once endearing stories of his dreams and ambitions started to fade into the background as he became increasingly distant. Jake had always been someone who spoke passionately about his goals, his desire to make something of himself. He had spoken of finding a better job, gaining more experience, and one day, moving forward in life. I had believed in him, supported him, and admired his determination. But soon, his words seemed hollow. He complained constantly about his low-paying job, the lack of career opportunities, and the control his mother had over his life. It was as if the world was against him, and he just couldn't find a way out. Meanwhile, I was trying to keep everything together. I had left my old life behind, determined to make something of myself, and I thought that living with Jake would be the start of a new chapter. But now, I was the one who found myself holding everything up. I had started to feel like I was invisible once again. Jake seemed more concerned with his friends and their nights out than with the responsibilities we both shared. When we talked about our future, he was vague, unsure of what he wanted or where he saw himself. At the same time, I found myself becoming more involved in the things that mattered to me. I had always dreamed of becoming a teacher, and though my path to that dream had been far from straightforward, I was still determined to get there. I started volunteering at local schools, gaining experience with children, and slowly, I was building my own identity. But even as I grew professionally, the emotional strain of my relationship with Jake weighed heavily on me. I knew that becoming a mother would change everything, but I hadn't expected how much it would challenge me. When I found out I was pregnant, I was both thrilled and terrified. Jake, on the other hand, seemed more concerned with the disruptions this would cause to his life. He no longer spoke of his dreams with the same passion, and he began to grow irritated with me when I asked for support. I had always believed that a child would bring us closer together. But instead, it seemed to be pulling us further apart. I tried to remain strong, knowing that I had been through so much already. My past had taught me that resilience was key, and I wasn't going to give up easily. But the weight of it all, the financial strain, the emotional distance from Jake, and the uncertainty of what was to come, became harder to bear. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The days were long, and Jake's lack of involvement left me feeling alone. He would disappear for hours at a time, spending weekends with his friends or at bars, leaving me to handle everything on my own. The baby was coming, and I couldn't afford to let myself break. Not when so much was at stake. I needed to take charge of my life once again. Jake's neglect wasn't something I could fix for him. I had done everything I could to support him, to believe in him, but I realized I couldn't carry both of us. I had to find a way to stand on my own 2 feet. For the sake of our child. For myself. So, I threw myself into preparing for motherhood. Knowing that I couldn't rely on anyone but myself, I started setting aside money, planning ahead for the baby's arrival, and doing everything I could to ensure that I would be ready. I wasn't going to be like my father, who had never truly supported me. I wouldn't allow myself to become invisible again. Despite the emotional pain, I found strength in the love I already had for the child I was carrying. And as the months passed, I realized that no matter what happened with Jake, I could handle it. I would take care of my baby. And I would make sure that our little family, even if it was just the two of us, would be okay. It felt as if everything in my life had led up to this moment. I had been trying to build a life with Jake, despite all the obstacles, but I began to realize that no matter how much I hoped for change, Jake wasn't the person I needed him to be. My dreams of a loving, supportive family were falling apart. And yet, in the midst of my despair, something surprising happened. Jake left. It wasn't dramatic. No grand confrontation. Just a quiet departure. He moved out, saying he needed time to figure things out, to take a break and get his life together. I knew that wasn't the whole story. But the truth didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that I was once again alone, left to raise our child by myself, without his help or support. At first, I felt a deep, gut-wrenching sadness. I thought that, maybe, if I had been more understanding or supportive, things could have worked out. But soon, the sadness turned into anger. How could he leave me like this? When I had supported him through everything. He had promised me that we would build a life together. But instead, he had left me to shoulder everything on my own. I moved into a small apartment. Just me and the baby. The financial strain hit hard. Without Jake's contribution, I was barely making ends meet. I had to stretch every dollar, cutting corners where I could. There was no room for extras. No time for breaks. I was exhausted, both physically and emotionally, but I was determined to make it work. I had no other choice. And then, unexpectedly, help came from a source I never would have anticipated: Jake's mother, Karen. I had always felt like an outsider in Jake's family. Karen had always kept her distance, cold and reserved, never truly accepting me as part of the family. She had her own way of doing things, and I was just a small part of a larger picture that she didn't feel the need to acknowledge. But now, in my time of need, she reached out. It started with a phone call. I was sitting in my tiny apartment, nursing my daughter, when my phone rang. It was Karen. I had almost forgotten what it was like to hear from her. She spoke softly, her voice uncharacteristically kind. She had heard about the difficulties I was facing and wanted to help. "I know things haven't been easy between us, Kimberly," she said, "but you and Sydney shouldn't have to go through this alone. If you need anything, I'm here." I was taken aback. It had never occurred to me that Karen might offer help. After all, she had always been so cold toward me. But here she was, offering her support. I couldn't believe it. At that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that not all the support I needed would come from the people I had hoped for. Sometimes, it came from unexpected places. Karen invited me and Sydney to move in with her for a while. She had a large house. And though it wasn't luxurious, it was warm and comfortable. She had her own health problems to contend with. But she seemed genuinely concerned for me and my baby. I was hesitant at first. I had spent so much of my life feeling like an outsider. And I wasn't sure I could accept help from someone who had always kept me at arm's length. But I had no other choice. I moved in with Karen, and it was a strange, bittersweet feeling. On the one hand, I was grateful for the roof over our heads and the chance to catch my breath. On the other hand, it felt like a defeat. I had spent so long trying to prove that I could handle everything on my own. But now, I was forced to rely on the very person who had once made me feel insignificant. Karen, despite her reserved nature, was surprisingly warm with Sydney. She doted on her granddaughter, taking her for walks, buying her clothes, and making sure she had everything she needed. I was grateful for the help. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel like I had failed. I had always dreamed of being the one who could provide for my child without relying on anyone else. But here I was, living in someone else's home, with my hands tied financially and emotionally. But as the days passed, I began to see things differently. Karen, for all her flaws and coldness, was offering something I hadn't expected: stability. She wasn't perfect, but she was reliable, and in that moment, that was all I needed. It wasn't long before I started to regain my sense of self. I found a new job, something I could manage while also caring for Sydney. It wasn't the teaching job I had dreamed of, but it was a step in the right direction. And, For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was moving forward, even if it was only by small increments. Jake's absence, though painful, had given me the space to rediscover my own strength. I didn't need him to validate my worth. I had already proven that to myself. And now, with Karen's unexpected support, I knew that I wasn't as alone as I had once believed. As time went on, my life began to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. Karen, despite everything, proved to be a reliable presence in my life when I needed it most. Slowly, she and I began to build an understanding, though it was never the deep, nurturing relationship I had once hoped for. Still, I appreciated her support more than I could express. I found a job as a nanny for a young boy named Matthew, who was struggling to connect with others after the loss of his mother. It felt like fate. The work was challenging but rewarding, and I began to see the world through his eyes, his quiet, gentle spirit reminding me of the strength I had inside of me. My bond with Sydney grew stronger each day, and despite the difficulties, I found myself smiling more often than I ever had before. Then, something unexpected happened. I met Andrew, Matthew's father. He was different, kind, understanding, and deeply appreciative of the connection I had built with his son. We became close, and over time, I realized that I had found someone who truly cared for me. Someone who valued me for who I was, not for the things I had to offer. Corey, on the other hand, continued to live a life disconnected from his responsibilities. His social media updates painted a picture of success. But I knew better now. I had moved on, and with Andrew by my side, I found a new kind of love and peace. Through it all, I learned that love isn't always about the grand gestures. It's in the quiet moments of understanding, in the people who step in when you least expect it, and in the strength you find within yourself when life forces you to grow. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring life stories.